The unexpected crisis. On the peaceful planet of Xylon, life had always been calm. The alien species that lived there were known for their wisdom and advanced technology. They had long ago solved many of the problems that plagued other civilizations, creating a society where everyone lived in harmony. They had mastered energy, space travel, and even artificial intelligence. Their planet, surrounded by breathtaking landscapes of floating mountains and shimmering seas, was a symbol of peace in the galaxy. The aliens, who called themselves the Xylons, were a kind and curious race. Their technology was far beyond anything the universe had seen, but they never used it to harm others. They focused on knowledge and exploration, believing that peace was the true path to success. For centuries, the Xylons had no real enemies, no wars to fight, and no crises to face. Life was as perfect as they could have hoped for. But all of that changed one fateful day. The Xylons were enjoying a normal, peaceful morning when a sudden disturbance appeared in their skies. It was a strange, dark, cloud-like shape moving toward the planet at an incredible speed. The Xylon scientists quickly scrambled to study the anomaly, but it didn't take long for them to realize the truth. This was no ordinary storm. The dark shape was a massive spaceship, unlike anything the Xylons had ever seen. Its surface was sleek and metallic, constantly shifting and changing. It was as if the ship itself was alive. It hovered above the planet, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere, shaking everything beneath it. The Xylon leaders immediately called for a meeting. This was a moment of crisis. They had no idea what this ship was, where it had come from, or who was inside it. The Xylon military was quick to respond, launching their most advanced defensive weapons. The air filled with the sound of energy blasts, and the ground shook as the Xylons tried to fend off the mysterious ship. However, nothing they did seemed to work. Their weapons bounced off the surface of the ship as if it was impervious to everything the Xylons could throw at it. The once proud Xylon defenses were useless against this unknown force. The Xylon military was not used to being defeated. For centuries, they had been the most powerful force in the galaxy, but now they were helpless. The spaceship above them continued to hover, watching, waiting. It didn't attack. It just stayed there, as if it was studying them. The Xylons were puzzled. They could not understand what was happening or why this mysterious enemy had appeared. As hours passed, the Xylons began to panic. Their world, once so peaceful and secure, was now under threat. The leaders tried everything they could think of, but the situation was growing worse. The ship's presence was causing disruptions in the Xylons' energy systems. Their cities started losing power, and the life support systems in their largest space stations began to fail. It wasn't just a matter of military defeat. Their entire way of life was being threatened. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, something even more frightening happened. From the dark ship, strange, black tendrils began to descend toward the planet. The tendrils reached the ground, cutting through the surface and creating rifts in the landscape. The Xylons tried to counter this new threat with their technology, but once again, it was useless. The tendrils spread rapidly, swallowing up everything in their path, leaving destruction in their wake. The Xylon leaders were now desperate. They knew they needed help, but where could they turn? There were no other civilizations nearby that could help them. The galaxy was vast, and most of the other species were either too far away or too weak to offer assistance. The Xylons were alone, and they realized that the fate of their planet rested entirely on their shoulders. In a moment of desperation, the Xylon Council did something they had never done before. They sent out a distress signal, but this was no ordinary call for help. This message was sent to a race that was known across the galaxy, not for their peaceful ways, but for their toughness, their survival skills, and their ability to face the impossible. The message was sent to the Deathworlders, humans from Earth. The Xylons knew of the Deathworlders. They had heard stories of these humans, how they survived on a planet full of danger and death, where everything from the creatures to the environment itself wanted to kill them. The Deathworlders were known for their incredible resilience, their ability to fight back against impossible odds. The Xylons had never considered them allies. But now, in the face of this unprecedented crisis, they had no choice. The distress signal was simple. It pleaded for help, explaining that their planet was under attack by a force they could not comprehend or defeat. It was a long shot. Would the Deathworlders even care to help them? Or would they see this as a chance to conquer a weaker species? The Xylons didn't know, but they had no other choice. If the Deathworlders were their only hope, then they would take that chance. As the message was sent, the Xylons could only wait, uncertain of what the future would bring. Would the Deathworlders answer their call, or would they face the destruction of their world alone? The fate of Xylon now rested in the hands of the one species they never thought they would turn to for help. The Xylons, having lived in peace for so long, had never truly understood the concept of danger. To them, their planet was a paradise. They had built cities that defied nature, created machines that could shape the world to their will, and devised technologies that allowed them to explore the stars. Their society was built on knowledge and peace, and they had never needed to defend themselves. The very idea of a species struggling to survive in a hostile environment was beyond their comprehension. But the Deathworlders, humans from Earth, were something entirely different. The Xylons had heard stories of these humans, but to them, they were little more than myths. The Deathworlders were known across the galaxy as survivors, but the Xylons never truly understood the harshness of the worlds these humans came from. Earth was a planet unlike any other, a world teeming with deadly creatures, natural disasters, and extreme climates that would destroy most life forms within days. The humans who called Earth home had learned to survive in these conditions, adapting and evolving in ways that made them capable of thriving where other species would have perished. The Xylons had no concept of what it meant to live on a death world. To them, every world was hospitable in its own way, each with its own rhythm and balance. They had seen planets with severe weather conditions, planets with violent predators, and planets with deadly toxins in the air. But none of those worlds had the overwhelming constant danger that Earth presented. On Earth, life had no guarantees. Every day was a battle for survival. The Xylons had once dismissed Earth as a place of chaos, a planet where life was constantly at war with itself. They had never imagined a species emerging from such a harsh world could be capable of kindness or cooperation. But the Deathworlders were different. The Xylons had learned that these humans were not only survivors but also conquerors. They didn't shy away from challenges. They fought to protect their own, and even when faced with impossible odds, they pushed forward. Earth's people were fearless, strong, and relentless. The Xylons had studied the Deathworlders, and their stories were legendary. On Earth, humans had fought off alien invasions, survived devastating wars, and lived through natural catastrophes that would have destroyed any other civilization. The most incredible thing about these humans was that they had done it all not with superior technology or advanced weaponry, but with sheer willpower and ingenuity. They were a species that faced the harshest challenges in the universe and came out stronger on the other side. However, the Xylons weren't sure if the Deathworlders would even help them. Earth had never been known for its alliances or diplomacy. Humans were known to protect their own interests first and foremost. Would they be willing to lend their strength to an alien species in need, especially one they had never met before? The Xylons couldn't know for sure. All they had were stories. The most famous of these stories was the Battle of Earth. Centuries ago, Earth had been invaded by an alien race with technology far superior to their own. The invaders believed that Earth's primitive defenses would be easy to overcome, but they underestimated the humans. Instead of surrendering or being wiped out, the Deathworlders fought back. The humans didn't have the advanced technology the invaders had, but they had something far more dangerous: determination. The humans fought a guerrilla war using their knowledge of their environment, their resourcefulness, and their unbreakable spirit to turn the tide of the battle. They pushed the invaders off Earth, saving their planet, and proving that there was no force too great to challenge them. The Xylons had also heard stories about the human colonies on other planets. These colonies were often established on worlds that had no natural resources, no friendly environments, and no protections from the dangers of space. The Deathworlders were forced to adapt to each new world, finding ways to survive and thrive in conditions that would break most species. Whether it was a planet filled with toxic air, hostile wildlife, or unrelenting storms, humans learned to survive. Some of the humans had even found ways to build entire cities in the harshest conditions, from towering structures built into the sides of mountains to underground cities that protected them from lethal environments above. They had made their homes in places where no other species would dare to live. But what worried the Xylons the most was not the Deathworlders' strength or ingenuity, it was their unpredictability. The humans had a reputation for being fiercely independent and difficult to control. They were not a species that could be commanded or easily manipulated. If the Xylons wanted the Deathworlders' help, they would need to find a way to appeal to their sense of honor, or at the very least, their interest in the fight. The Xylons could only hope that the Deathworlders would respond out of a sense of duty or perhaps curiosity. But there was always the fear that the humans would see this crisis as an opportunity to exploit the Xylons or take control of the planet for themselves. Still, there was one thing that the Xylons knew for sure. The Deathworlders were not afraid of death. They had faced it countless times and emerged victorious. They might be the only species capable of standing up to the invaders that threatened Xylon. But would the Deathworlders answer the call? The Xylons' message had been sent, and now there was nothing left to do but wait. The fate of Xylon rested in the hands of a race that had survived the deadliest planet in the galaxy. Would they come to the Xylons' aid, or would they turn their backs on them, leaving them to face the unknown enemy alone? Time would tell. The call for help. The Xylons, now desperate, had done everything within their power to try and stop the invaders from decimating their planet. They had used every weapon in their arsenal, every piece of technology they had perfected over centuries, but all to no avail. The dark, ominous ship in the sky seemed impervious to everything they tried, and the alien tendrils that had begun to spread across the surface of Xylon were threatening to destroy their cities, their crops, and everything they had worked so hard to build. The once thriving cities of Xylon were now crumbling under the weight of an alien force they couldn't even understand. The Xylon leadership convened in a crisis meeting, each one looking more hopeless than the last. They had never faced an enemy like this, one that didn't respond to their technology, one that seemed immune to their finest defense systems. The people of Xylon were losing faith in their ability to protect their planet. If the enemy kept advancing at this rate, it wouldn't be long before their entire civilization was wiped out. The decision was unanimous. They had no choice but to reach out to the Deathworlders. Though it seemed almost absurd to send a distress call to a race known for their harsh, dangerous ways, it was the only option left. The Xylons had heard of the Deathworlders' incredible resilience and determination to survive against the odds, but they had never considered them as potential allies. In their peaceful, technologically advanced society, the idea of asking for help from a species so different from them seemed almost foreign. Yet now, faced with extinction, they were willing to put their pride aside and make the call. The Xylon Council turned to the only remaining option: the galaxy's communication network. They would send a message to Earth, pleading for assistance. The message was carefully crafted, conveying their desperation but also their hope that the Deathworlders could come to their aid. It was a fragile hope. Would the humans even see the message in time? Would they even care? The message was broadcast to Earth's space stations, sent through multiple channels in hopes that it would be intercepted quickly. It wasn't just a request for help. It was a plea for survival. The Xylons had no idea how Earth would respond, but they had no other choice. The humans might be their only hope. Days passed, and the Xylon leaders grew more restless. They watched as the invaders continued their relentless assault, cutting through their defenses with ease. The ship above their world had never moved, its dark presence a constant reminder of the danger that loomed over them. The tendrils that stretched out from the invaders' ship were spreading rapidly, consuming everything in their path. Entire forests were turning to dust, cities were sinking into the ground, and the once glorious seas of Xylon were being tainted by the invaders' strange technology. It was as if their entire planet was dying, slowly and painfully. And yet, the Xylons clung to hope. They had sent their call for help. They had reached out to the Deathworlders, who were known across the galaxy for their ability to survive and fight when the odds were impossible. The Xylons held their breath, hoping that somewhere, far away on Earth, the message was being received. At first, there was silence. The waiting felt endless. Was the message lost in space? Were the humans even listening? Perhaps the Deathworlders had their own problems to deal with, or perhaps they didn't care. The Xylons' desperation grew with every passing moment. Their world was slipping away, and they had no way of stopping it. The only thing keeping them going was the faint hope that the Deathworlders would hear their cry for help and respond. Then, at long last, the response came. It wasn't an immediate response, and it wasn't the kind of response the Xylons had hoped for. Instead of a fleet of Deathworlder ships arriving in a blaze of glory, the Xylons received a single message, a brief transmission from a human commander. The voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but there was a certain edge to it that spoke of a willingness to act, even in the face of danger. "We've received your message," the human commander's voice said. "We'll be there. Prepare yourselves." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a show of force. But it was enough. The Deathworlders were coming. The Xylon leaders let out a collective sigh of relief, though they knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. The humans were coming, but would they arrive in time? And even if they did, what could they do against an enemy so powerful, so mysterious? The Xylons weren't sure, but they knew one thing. They had been given a chance that they might not have had otherwise. Now all they could do was wait. As the days dragged on, the Xylon military began to prepare for the arrival of the Deathworlders. They fortified their cities, strategized with what little resources they had left, and made the final preparations to defend their world. But deep down, they knew that the true battle was only beginning. They had called the Deathworlders to save them, but would their arrival truly be the turning point in the war for Xylon's survival? Only time would tell, but the Xylons were holding onto a sliver of hope, something they hadn't had in a long time. The Deathworlders were coming, and that meant the fight for Xylon was far from over. The arrival of the Deathworlders. The moment the Deathworlders' ships breached the atmosphere of Xylon, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. The Xylons had prepared as best they could, reinforcing their cities and reactivating their defense systems in anticipation of the humans' arrival. Still, despite the feeling of hope that the Deathworlders' presence had brought, there was an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. Would these legendary survivors truly be able to help them? Or were they about to be faced with a new set of challenges, ones that no amount of human resilience could overcome? The Xylons had expected a grand fleet, a show of power, perhaps an armada of human ships coming to rain destruction upon the enemy. Instead, what descended upon Xylon was a single, unassuming vessel. It was small compared to the massive ships that had threatened to wipe them out. The ship's hull was worn, as if it had seen battle after battle across the galaxy. Its design was crude, compared to the sleek and refined ships of the Xylons, and its engines emitted a low hum that resonated in the air, vibrating through the ground beneath them. This was not the force they had imagined. The Xylons had expected something more imposing, something they could admire and take comfort in. But what they saw instead was the unmistakable image of something far more dangerous, a ship that had seen too many wars, too many deaths, to care about appearances. The humans disembarked swiftly. They wore rough, functional clothing, nothing like the shining uniforms the Xylons wore. Their faces were set in a permanent expression of determination, their eyes scanning the surroundings with a wariness that seemed to match the grimness of the situation. The Xylons couldn't help but notice the scars many of the Deathworlders bore, marks of past battles, of survival, and of hardship. These were not diplomats, not explorers, but warriors, people who had fought on worlds far harsher than Xylon and had lived to tell the tale. The Xylon commanders approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. They had no knowledge of how humans operated in war. The humans' reputation preceded them. They were unpredictable, known for throwing themselves into situations that others would have deemed impossible. But what they lacked in understanding of the Xylons' ways, they more than made up for in raw determination. The first human to step forward was a man who seemed older than the others, his face weathered and tired, his hair a salt and pepper mix of gray and black. His presence was commanding, though not by size or stature. His confidence was in his eyes, a quiet assurance that spoke of years spent in the most hostile environments known to any species. He had seen death up close, had stared into the abyss, and had survived. "We're here," he said simply, his voice rough but steady. "What's the situation?" The Xylon leader, a tall and graceful being with luminous skin, stepped forward to address him. She explained the crisis in as much detail as she could, but the humans listened with calm attentiveness, interrupting only to ask direct, to-the-point questions. There was no need for pleasantries, no desire to sugarcoat the gravity of the situation. The humans were here to fight, not to talk. "Do you have any idea what we're up against?" the human leader asked, his tone serious. The Xylons had explained everything they knew about the invaders, their dark ship, the tendrils spreading across the surface, the way they were immune to any of the Xylons' attempts at defense. Yet despite all the unknowns, the human leader's expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened even more. He nodded once, as though to himself, then turned to his crew. "All right," he said, raising his voice for the others to hear. "We're not here to die. We're here to win. Let's get to work." What happened next would change the course of the battle. The humans immediately set up a perimeter around the largest of the Xylon cities, quickly assessing the best defensive positions. They didn't wait for permission. They simply began the work of preparing for war. The Xylons, though initially taken aback by the humans' no-nonsense approach, soon followed suit. They offered their most advanced technology, but the humans rejected most of it. Instead, they set up their own equipment, using makeshift tools, old-fashioned weapons, and basic strategies that the Xylons found both baffling and impressive. One of the human soldiers, a woman with short-cropped hair and a hardened expression, surveyed the area through a set of binoculars. Her eyes flicked from one place to another, calculating every possible scenario. She seemed almost bored by the elaborate Xylon machinery and technology. "This won't be enough," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "We're going to need more than this to survive." The Xylon commanders approached her, puzzled by her comment. "What do you mean?" one asked, though the question felt almost futile. This woman had seen things that the Xylons couldn't even imagine, and yet she was dismissing their most sophisticated weapons. "Just a hunch," the soldier said, grinning for a moment as if to herself. "I've been on plenty of worlds like this. They've got all the tech in the universe, but they don't know how to fight the way we do." The Xylons were starting to realize that the Deathworlders were not just here to defend, they were here to teach. The humans' methods were entirely different. While the Xylons believed in controlling everything through precision and order, the humans were more chaotic in their approach. They believed in adaptability, in improvising when things went wrong, in using whatever they had at their disposal. As the day went on, the Xylon warriors began to follow the humans' lead. They were taught how to use their surroundings, how to create traps and ambushes. The humans showed them how to fight in ways the Xylons had never even considered. The Deathworlders made no distinction between strategy and survival. It was all part of the same battle. Night fell, and the invaders' ship still hovered above Xylon, dark and silent. But the humans and Xylons were ready. They had made preparations. And now, as the battle loomed ahead, Both sides knew that the outcome would depend not just on technology, but on a fight for survival, a fight where the Deathworlders' experience could make all the difference. The Xylons had asked for help, and now they were learning from the best. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they were ready to do what they did best: survive, adapt, and fight to the bitter end. The question was no longer whether the humans could help. The question was, could the Xylons keep up? The battle for Cylon had only just begun. Battle on the alien world. The moment the first shot was fired, the atmosphere on Cylon shifted. It was no longer a planet on the edge of extinction, waiting helplessly for a miracle. With the Deathworlders on the ground, there was a fire ignited in the hearts of the Xylons, a newfound sense of purpose. The humans' presence brought an energy that transcended the high-tech cities of the Xylon world. It was raw, unpolished, and alive. The battle had begun. The invaders above Cylon had been silent for days. But now, as the humans and the Xylons prepared their forces, the dark ship in the sky began to stir. A strange hum resonated through the atmosphere, sending a wave of nervous anticipation through the Xylon ranks. The tendrils that had spread out across the planet like a blight now began to pulse with energy, almost as if responding to the imminent clash. A cold wind swept through the cities as the ground began to tremble. It was a sign that the enemy was ready to attack once again. The human commander, the man with the grizzled face and battle-worn eyes, stood at the front of the Xylon defensive line. His gaze was unwavering, sharp as a blade, as he observed the horizon. His hand clenched around a worn rifle, but it was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of the many battles he had fought, and won on worlds much more hostile than this one. He turned to his soldiers and the Xylon forces standing beside them, giving a quick nod. No words were needed. They knew what had to be done. The Deathworlders' plan was simple, yet terrifyingly effective. They were going to strike hard and fast, take the enemy by surprise, hit them where they least expected, and make them feel the pressure. But the Xylons, with all their advanced technology, had never fought like this. They weren't used to the chaos and unpredictability the humans thrived in. In their quiet, peaceful cities, they had built perfect plans, engineered perfect solutions. But this was war, the kind of war that couldn't be controlled by mere machines and calculations. The first wave of attackers, humanoid figures draped in dark armor, their eyes glowing a sickly red, emerged from the alien ship. They didn't march. They didn't move with the precision of an organized army. They came in waves, swarming like insects, with no thought for strategy or tactics, only a blind drive to destroy. They were relentless, unstoppable, and seemingly fueled by rage. The Xylon forces fired their energy weapons at the invaders, but as before, nothing seemed to faze them. The blasts were absorbed by some invisible shield, and the invaders kept coming. Panic began to rise in the ranks of the Xylon soldiers. This was no longer a battle they could win with their advanced technology alone. They had been trained to rely on their superiority, but now they were realizing the true nature of the enemy they were up against. But the Deathworlders had no such fears. The humans didn't wait for orders. They took action, their bodies moving instinctively as they dropped into low, defensive positions. They didn't wait for the enemy to come to them. They ran toward it. With their rifles raised, they moved with terrifying speed and precision, picking off invaders with shockingly accurate shots. The Xylon soldiers watched in awe as the Deathworlders seemed to bend the battlefield to their will. Where the Xylons relied on technology, the humans relied on instincts. They worked as a unit, anticipating the enemy's moves before the invaders even knew what was happening. The human commander was in the thick of it, his soldiers following his every move. His rifle cracked with every shot, each one finding its mark. But it wasn't just his weapon that commanded attention. It was the way he moved, the way he fought. His every step was calculated, deliberate, a dance with death that he had perfected over countless battles. He wasn't fighting for glory or honor. He was fighting for survival. His focus was absolute, as if nothing existed except the battle unfolding before him. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. The enemy didn't stand a chance. But even as the Deathworlders pushed forward, the invaders' onslaught grew fiercer. The tendrils, once dormant, were now moving across the battlefield like living creatures, reaching for anything they could touch, pulling anything into their grasp. The Xylons' advanced barriers were no match for the organic nature of the tendrils, and many of the Xylon soldiers found themselves ensnared, helpless as the alien creatures dragged them away. The Deathworlders, however, weren't as easily caught. They moved through the chaos like a storm, avoiding the tendrils with unnatural agility. It wasn't luck, it was training. The humans knew how to read the battlefield. They knew how to anticipate danger. They were the predators, and the invaders were the prey. The Xylons, who had watched as their own soldiers fell to the tendrils, now saw the humans act with an almost supernatural grace as they freed their comrades and destroyed the tendrils wherever they encountered them. But the battle was far from over. The invaders began to change their tactics, sending out even larger and more dangerous waves of their soldiers, while the dark ship above them began to charge its energy weapons. The atmosphere around Cylon grew thick with tension, as the enemy's forces seemed to grow stronger with every passing minute. The humans, however, refused to back down. The Xylons had never seen anything like it. The Deathworlders fought as though their lives depended on it. And they did. But it wasn't just about survival for the humans. It was about honor, about proving that no matter how insurmountable the odds, they could stand against anything the universe threw at them. The human commander looked over at the Xylon leader, his eyes locking with hers. There was a silent understanding between them now. This wasn't just about helping the Xylons. It was about making a stand, about fighting for something greater than themselves. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting to protect their own. They were fighting for the survival of a species that had never truly understood what it meant to fight. "Hold the line," the commander said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We fight until they break." And with that, the Deathworlders and the Xylons fought side by side, their forces working together in a way neither had expected. The invaders, though relentless, were beginning to falter. They were not used to facing opponents who adapted so quickly, who fought with such intensity. The tide of the battle was turning, and the Deathworlders were at the heart of that change. The battle was far from won, but one thing was certain. The invaders had underestimated the combined might of the Deathworlders and the Xylons, and that mistake would cost them dearly. An unexpected ally. The battle raged on, the air thick with smoke, and the sounds of energy blasts and gunfire. The Deathworlders and Xylons fought side by side, their combined forces making a powerful stand against the invaders. The tendrils that had spread across the surface of Xylon were being torn apart by the humans' tactical prowess, and the Xylon defense systems were starting to push back against the dark ship's assault. For the first time since the invaders had arrived, the Xylons saw a glimmer of hope. But just as the tide of the battle seemed to turn in their favor, something unexpected happened. From the heart of the invaders' ship, a new wave of creatures emerged, larger, more fearsome than anything they had encountered before. These beings were towering figures, their bodies covered in dark, metallic armor that hummed with energy. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, their weapons crackling with power as they cut through the front lines of the battle. The humans, though formidable, found themselves being pushed back by the sheer force of these new foes. The Xylons, too, were beginning to feel the strain. Their energy shields were beginning to flicker under the relentless assault, and their advanced weaponry wasn't having the same effect on these new invaders. The air was thick with tension as both sides regrouped, trying to adapt to this new powerful threat. The invaders were evolving, adapting in ways the Xylons and Deathworlders couldn't yet understand. In the midst of the chaos, the human commander, his face streaked with dirt and blood, surveyed the battlefield. He had fought on hundreds of worlds, faced countless enemies, and survived wars that had wiped out entire civilizations. But this was different. He could feel the weight of the battle bearing down on him. The Xylons had helped, but it was clear now that they weren't enough. The Deathworlders were the only ones who could truly take the fight to the invaders. As the human commander scanned the battlefield, something caught his eye. A small group of invaders was advancing on the Xylon command center, weapons raised, their tendrils flailing wildly. The Xylons were struggling to hold them off, their defense lines crumbling. Without hesitation, the commander turned to his team and gave the order. "We're going in," he said, his voice low and commanding. "We need to cut off their supply line and take out that lead invader. If we don't, we're going to lose." His soldiers moved swiftly, splitting off from the main force and charging toward the invader's flank. The Xylons watched in awe as the humans worked together with military precision, their movements fluid and coordinated, taking down invader after invader with ruthless efficiency. They didn't hesitate, didn't waste time with strategy. There was no time for that. They just fought. But then, as they reached the center of the invaders' forces, something unexpected happened. The commander's eyes narrowed as he saw a figure in the distance, a lone figure, standing in the midst of the enemy ranks. It was unlike any of the other invaders. This one was different. Its armor was darker, more intricate, and there was something in its posture that made the commander's instincts scream. The invader raised its weapon, and the humans moved to intercept it. But the moment the weapon fired, the ground beneath them trembled, and a massive explosion erupted from the center of the battlefield. The humans were thrown back, their shields cracking under the force of the blast. The Xylons, still holding their lines, looked on in disbelief as the human forces regrouped, their faces showing no fear, only resolve. The human commander, though shaken, stood tall. His gaze never left the figure in the distance. It was as if the invader knew exactly what it was doing, playing a different game altogether. The humans and the Xylons were up against something far worse than they had anticipated. It wasn't just a battle of forces anymore. It was a battle of minds. The commander's thoughts were interrupted as the figure suddenly moved. It didn't attack the humans or the Xylons, but instead made its way toward the Xylon command center. It was an unanticipated move, one that made no sense at first. Was this invader trying to negotiate, or was it a trap? Before the commander could react, the Xylon leader, who had been observing the battle from a nearby platform, raised her hand. She had seen something that no one else had noticed. A small hidden device on the invader's armor, just beneath its shoulder plate. It was glowing faintly, a faint pulse of energy that seemed almost familiar. The Xylon leader's eyes widened as she made the connection. "This is no invader," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "It's one of our own." The humans turned to her in confusion, but the Xylon leader's voice was steady, almost calm. "It's not just an enemy we're fighting. These invaders, they've been controlled. Somehow, they've taken control of one of our people. And now it's trying to give us a message." The commander's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible that the invaders had found a way to manipulate the Xylons themselves? That the dark force attacking them wasn't just a mindless alien race, but something more insidious, something that could control even their own? Without hesitation, the human commander signaled to his team, "We need to get to that figure, now. If the Xylons are right, this could change everything." The Deathworlders moved quickly, cutting through the battlefield with precision. They weren't just fighting the invaders now. They were fighting to uncover the truth. If they could reach the mysterious figure, they might just find the key to ending the invasion. But as they got closer, the figure turned to face them, its helmet removed, revealing a face the Xylons would never have expected. A face that was unmistakably Xylon. This was no invader. It was one of their own. A Xylon who had been captured and transformed into something else. The Xylon leader's eyes filled with shock and sorrow. This was a betrayal of the worst kind. Not only had their enemies infiltrated their ranks, but they had twisted one of their own into a weapon. The commander stepped forward, his voice firm. "We'll free him," he said, the determination in his voice as strong as steel. "We'll end this, one way or another." And just like that, the battle shifted once again. What had begun as a fight for survival had now become something more personal. The Deathworlders and Xylons had to face the grim reality that their enemy wasn't just an invading force. It was a force that had already begun to break them from the inside out. Now they had to fight not only to protect their world, but to save the very souls of those they had once considered allies. The enemy had underestimated the Deathworlders, but it had also underestimated the resilience of the Xylons. Together, they would fight for the survival of their people, and for the redemption of those lost to the invaders' control. Victory or sacrifice. The battle had reached its crescendo, and the weight of the situation pressed heavily on every soul involved. The ground beneath Cylon trembled with the relentless clash of forces, the air thick with the acrid stench of smoke and the pulse of weapons firing. Above, the dark alien ship loomed, its shadow casting a foreboding chill over the planet. The humans and Xylons had fought valiantly, pushed to their absolute limits, but now, the time had come for a final, desperate push. The invaders had revealed their hand, turning one of the Xylons into their twisted weapon. And the stakes had never been higher. The human commander, his clothes torn and bloodied, surveyed the battlefield from a vantage point on the edge of a ruined city. His soldiers, though exhausted, stood with him, determined to give everything they had left. The Xylon forces, too, were regrouping, their morale bolstered by the discovery that the enemy could be beaten, if they could strike at the heart of the invasion. But even as they prepared for the final assault, the weight of their situation gnawed at them all. They knew that this last push might not be enough to guarantee survival. The invaders were more powerful than anyone had anticipated, and though they had suffered losses, they still had the advantage. The question on everyone's mind was whether they could survive this final confrontation. The Xylon leader, her face hardened with both determination and sorrow, stood beside the commander, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We have one chance," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "If we fail, our world is lost." The human commander nodded, his mind racing. "We need to break the command center. If we can take out their leader, the rest will crumble. But we can't do it alone. It's time to finish this together." It was a simple plan, yet incredibly risky. They would storm the invaders' command center, a towering structure at the heart of the battlefield. From there, they would strike at the invader who had manipulated the Xylon warrior, the one controlling the invasion from the inside. If they could sever the source of the enemy's power, the invaders would lose their advantage. But it wasn't going to be easy. The command center was heavily guarded, and even with the combined forces of the Xylons and the Deathworlders, the risk of failure was high. As the forces began to assemble, the commander looked back at his team. The soldiers were exhausted, their bodies battered from hours of fighting. But there was something in their eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. It was a quiet resolve, the same kind of resolve that had carried humanity through countless wars on their home planet. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for each other, and for Xylon. The Xylons, too, were not the same as they had been when the Deathworlders first arrived. They had learned from the humans, their tactics, their grit, and their ability to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. What they once viewed as primitive, they now saw as powerful. The combination of advanced technology and raw, unrelenting human will had made them a force unlike anything the invaders had ever faced. With one last rallying cry, the human commander gave the order to move forward. The forces surged toward the command center, pushing through the enemy's outer defenses. The air around them crackled with energy as weapons blazed. The Deathworlders and the Xylons moved together in synchronized chaos, each one working toward the same goal, with the same unspoken understanding. The invaders, stunned by the unity of their enemies, hesitated for a moment. That was all the humans and Xylons needed. As they neared the heart of the command center, the full scope of the invaders' power became clear. The dark ship, hovering ominously above the planet, began to glow with an otherworldly light. Energy rippled from its surface, and the ground trembled as the ship prepared for a final assault. The invaders, sensing the tide turning, threw everything they had left at the approaching forces. The battle reached a fever pitch as Cylon warriors and Deathworlder soldiers fought with all their might, pushing forward inch by inch. But in the midst of the chaos, something extraordinary happened. As the human commander and the Cylon leader neared the command center, they encountered a familiar figure, the Cylon soldier who had been twisted by the invaders' control. His eyes were blank, his movements robotic, as he stood between them and their goal. The human commander knew what had to be done, but the sight of the Cylon soldier, once a proud warrior, now reduced to a weapon of the enemy, struck a deep chord in him. "We can't let them win," the commander said, his voice heavy with determination. "We can free him. We can still save him." The Cylon leader nodded grimly. But the cost, it might be too high. There was no time to argue. The invaders were closing in, and the command center was within reach. They had to act fast. The human commander and the Cylon leader fought through the soldiers' defense, their weapons flashing in the dim light. Each strike brought them closer to the soldier, but with every move, the invaders' influence seemed to grow stronger, pushing back against their efforts. In a final, desperate move, the human commander made the ultimate sacrifice. He charged forward, his rifle raised high, and with one mighty swing, he knocked the weapon from the Cylon soldier's hands. The soldier hesitated, his blank eyes flickering with something resembling recognition. It was a fleeting moment, just enough time for the Cylon leader to reach him, her hand touching his armor, whispering words of a language long forgotten. The human commander's heart pounded in his chest as he watched, praying that this was enough. For a moment, nothing happened. The battlefield seemed to pause, as if the entire universe held its breath. Then, slowly, the Cylon soldier's eyes cleared, the dark fog of the invader's influence lifting. He blinked, confused but no longer controlled. What have I done?" he murmured, his voice filled with regret and sorrow. The Cylon leader placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've been freed." But even as they celebrated this small victory, the final battle loomed. The invaders, sensing their control slipping, launched one final, all-out attack, their ship charging up for a devastating strike. The human commander and the Cylon leader exchanged one last glance. There was no more time for hesitation. It was now or never. Together, with the combined forces of humans and Cylons, they launched an all-out assault on the invaders' ship. The ground shook as the final assault began, the sky above them lighting up with energy. Explosions tore through the enemy ship's hull, and the invader leader, realizing it was too late, made a last-ditch effort to escape. But it was no use. The combined forces of the Deathworlders and the Cylons had overwhelmed them. The ship began to collapse, its dark power fading as the battle finally came to an end. In the aftermath, Cylon was left in ruins, but it had survived. The death toll was high, but the Cylons and Deathworlders had fought side by side, each one pushing the other to fight harder, to survive longer. The victory had come at a steep cost, but the sacrifices had been worth it. The Cylons stood together, rebuilding their world, their resolve strengthened by the battle they had fought. The Deathworlders, their mission complete, prepared to leave, but not without a sense of respect for the species they had helped save. "We'll be watching," the human commander said as he stood with the Cylon leader, gazing out over the planet they had saved. "You've earned the right to rebuild, but remember, there are always enemies out there. Don't forget what you've learned." The Cylon leader nodded, a new understanding in her eyes. "Thank you for everything." And with that, the Deathworlders turned their backs on Cylon, leaving the planet in the hands of those who had fought to protect it. The victory was theirs, but the true cost of the battle would be remembered for generations to come. Victory, they realized, was never just about surviving. It was about the choices you made in the heat of battle, the sacrifices you were willing to make, and the alliances you forged in the darkest moments. It was about the strength to stand, no matter the odds. The battle for Cylon had been won, but the story of the Deathworlders and the Xylons would live on, a testament to what could be achieved when two worlds came together to fight for survival.